active duty in the 1960s. That would be during the Vietnam War era. We have other veterans here who entered active duty or military service in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. But we're going to be focusing this morning on those who entered in the 1940s, the 1950s, and the 1960s. And we'll begin first with Andrew, who will lead us in a song.
My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the graves of wrath are stored. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terror swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never sound retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Our God is marching on. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us live to make men free, while God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. While God is marching on.
As we feature each individual soldier who entered military service in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, I would like for each veteran to come forward and sit on one of the front rows down here as your name is mentioned. Before we get into that, I wanted to remind the church and us remember those who have passed on since we featured them in 2019. These are the veterans who have gone to their promised land since we featured them in 2019. Mac McClenny, Adrian Billingsley, Roy Nance, Gary Brown, our minister's father, Carlisle King, Ralph Puckett, Dan Doss, Gene Dixon, as well as his late wife, Mary, and Robert Stroop. Gone but not forgotten. So we have two veterans still with us from the 1940s who both served in World War II, one in the Pacific Theater and one in the European Theater. John Carroll, who is at home, unable to walk well, with his wife, Jerry, who's still alive. John is 99 years old, will turn 100 on December the 12th of this year. He served in the U.S. Army in the European Theater. This is what he looked like many years ago. John is watching online. He was artillery man in the World War II in the European theater. Here he is manning one of his howitzers. When John left the European theater after the war in Europe ended, he was put on orders to go to the Philippines to prepare for the invasion of Japan. The United States was still at war with Japan. And he asked Jerry, his wife, to marry him as he departed for the Philippines. And she said yes. And they're still married today. John Carroll. I know he appreciates that. We're going to hold our applause until we're all recognized. We'll be down front. The next veteran is Freeland Talbert, pictured here with his wife, Barbara. Freeland served in the United States Navy in World War II. He's 97 years old. Freeland is pictured here in some old photographs that he provided. Changed a little bit. Freeland's duty, he was trained to operate a landing craft. You've seen these on war movies. He delivered Marines to the shores of islands in the Pacific. Carried a lot of scary men to war. Freeland, if you'll come on down, if you can find a seat down here on front somewhere, please. The next veteran is Charles Barrett. Charles is watching at home online with his wife Laura. Charles entered military service in the 1940s after World War II was over. Charles was assigned to military service in the Canal Zone, the Panama Canal, in 1950. Here you see him. He finished basic training in 1949 and then was assigned to the Canal Zone. Charles was assigned to the Signal Corps. We'll next feature our veterans who entered military service in the 1950s. They served in the Army National Guard, the U.S. Air Force, the Navy, and the Army. Our first veteran is Marvin Smith. Marvin, if you'll make your way down. Here he's pictured with his wife, Agnes. Marvin served in the U.S. Army. He was assigned and stationed in Europe. Marvin was a signal officer in the U.S. Army. Here you see him climbing a line pole. Here you see him stationed overseas. That's an old Ford Fairlane. Marvin, if you've noticed, drives a Cadillac nowadays. Our next veteran is Ken Cothran, pictured here with his wife, Betty. Ken is watching online with his wife, Betty, who's still in the hospital. Ken served in the U.S. Air Force. Ken was assigned to the Philippines. Kind of see him here as he's working as a kind of a military policeman at Clark Air Force Base and riding a little, I don't know what that is, jitney. He also showed us a picture of the military currency that military people were given in the Philippines. They didn't use the local currency, but the Air Force issued them this. Here he is on home on leave when he and Betty were married in 1952. Our next veteran, Bob Schaefer, pictured here with his wife, Myrtle. Bob, if you'll come on down forward. Bob is a Vietnam veteran serving in the U.S. Air Force, retired at the rank of Master Sergeant. He was awarded the Air Force Air Medal 7 times. Bob served as an elder of this church for many, many years. Bob was a flight engineer on a C-130. You see in the top left the view he had from his seat, the pilot and co-pilot. Bob showed a picture of the C-130 as it would land at Greenland on the ice cap there. If you can see it there, you put skis on the wheels so the plane could land. He was stationed, final duty station was here at Stewart Air Force Base, which was at Smyrna. Our next veteran, Nelson Eddy, pictured here with his wife, Jan. Nelson, if you'll come forward, please. Nelson served in the U.S. Army. He was assigned to the Army Security Agency. This was a very highly technical agency serving in the U.S. Army. There he is getting married after basic training to Jan. He was trained at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and then assigned to Camp Herzog in Germany. The security agency, there were 2 stations in the world, one in Germany and one in Africa. We had a member of our church that was assigned to that one as well. What they did was intercept, for lack of a better term, we'd call it now a wiretap, but back then they intercepted Morse code transmissions among all foreign countries. Their motto was, "In God we trust, all others we monitor." Our next veteran is Bill Beeson. Bill, if you'd come forward, please. He's pictured here with his wife, Gina. Bill served in the U.S. Army and also the Arkansas National Guard. His tour of duty in the Army was very unusual, as you will see in just a moment. But he was assigned to the National Guard in Arkansas during a very, very important time in our nation's history. In 1957, while Bill was assigned to the Arkansas National Guard, our country was split and divided over a recent Supreme Court ruling desegregating our schools. You see down there at the bottom, Governor Faubus of Arkansas. He had ordered the National Guard to prevent black children from entering the schools there in Little Rock. President Eisenhower federalized all those troops, which means he turned them into U.S. Army soldiers and ordered them to protect these children, to walk the children to and from their homes and to and from their classes and back home to keep them safely. My granddaughter, when she saw this, commented that Trish Myers, a local civics teacher here at one of our members at Siegel High School, had just taught the children about this history lesson. A very important time in our country. And President Eisenhower made sure the schools were going to be desegregated. And Bill Beeson played an important role in all of this. Bill also sent me a copy of his draft card. It's under the law today that every male from 18 to 25 must register for the draft. We all had one of these. This was his draft card. Our next veteran is Earl Beck. Earl, if you'll come forward, pictured here with his wife, Zella. Earl served in the United States Navy, retiring at the rank of Chief Petty Officer. Earl was a personnel specialist assigned to the Naval Air Station in Memphis. If you served in the military, you wanted to know somebody in personnel. They controlled where you were assigned, when you got leave, any other benefits about your personnel records. Earl was the one to make sure they were accurate and that you got where you wanted to go. The next feature are veterans from the 1960s. We had veterans that served in the Army National Guard, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Army, and the Public Health Service, which was the only non-combatant branch of the military. Our first veteran who entered the earliest in the 1960s was Doug Hutchins, pictured here with his wife, Brenda. Doug is a Vietnam veteran serving in the U.S. Army. He served in the branch of infantry. He left military service as a captain. Doug, all enlisted and officers who attended airborne school were awarded the parachutist badge. All officers and enlisted who were infantry soldiers and who engaged in combat were awarded the combat infantryman's badge. Doug was awarded the Silver Star, the third highest award in the military for valor. He was also awarded twice the Bronze Star, which was the fourth highest award for valor, twice for meritorious service, the Army Commendation Medal, and the Army Air Medal for combat operations. Doug first was deployed to Vietnam in 1964 after completing infantry basic course. He was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. Doug was a platoon leader among other jobs, but he led approximately 45 men, soldiers, in combat there in Vietnam. Following his first tour of duty, he was assigned as an ROTC instructor at MTSU in 1966 through 67. I was a freshman at MTSU, and all freshmen and sophomores were required to take ROTC. We didn't meet, but we crossed paths. After his tour of duty at MTSU, Lieutenant Hutchins was promoted to captain, and he was sent back to Vietnam for a tour of duty from 68 to 69. He was assigned to the 1st Cav Division during the time that he commanded a company-sized unit. That is about the same size as a centurion that we read about in the Bible, a Roman centurion, who was a commander of 100. Doug Hutchins was a commander of about 145. Following his second tour of duty, he was assigned to the Special Forces Unit in 1970 when he completed his military service. Our next veteran is Gary Guthrie, pictured here with his wife, Diane. Gary was unable to be here today. Is he watching online? Gary was a Vietnam veteran serving in the United States Navy. Gary was assigned to the USS Arlington. This was one of those secret operation ships that was very important during the war in Vietnam. You see the antennas on the ships. You don't see any guns. There were a few guns, but this ship was packed with signal equipment, transmission equipment. This ship was a relay tower for all communications in Vietnam from Navy, Air Force, and Army, and relayed it to a satellite, which then relayed it back down to the Pentagon. It enabled leaders in the Pentagon to be able to monitor day-to-day operations in Vietnam. Probably the most important piece of equipment that the Pentagon relied upon, which was this ship here that Gary maintained and kept operating. Our next veteran is Hiram Lester. Hiram, if you'll come forward. Hiram here pictured in his uniform in the Murfreesboro Police Department. Hiram served in the Tennessee Army National Guard from 64 to 1970. He achieved the rank of Specialist 5th Class. He was assigned to the 30th Armor Brigade. Following his basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, he went to advanced individual training. Hiram was trained as a mechanic on the Army aircraft L-20 that you see pictured here. He was also assigned as a driver for a deuce and a half, or what we call 2.5 ton truck. He was driver of that. There's a picture of the Armory as it existed at the time when he was in the military. Our next veteran is Don Matney. Don here is pictured with his wife, Judy. Don served in Vietnam. He's a Vietnam veteran with the United States Navy. He was an aviation electronics technician. You coming down here, Don? Don served 2 tours in Vietnam. After receiving his initial training at Millington, he was trained on the A-1 aircraft. Don was assigned to the carrier vessel Bonhomme Richard during his first tour of duty in Vietnam. Later assigned to the carrier vessel Yorktown in Vietnam. One of his stations was at Cam Ranh Bay, here it is pictured in 1969. Our next veteran is Ray Goolsby, pictured here with his wife Carol. Ray is a Vietnam veteran serving with the U.S. Air Force. Ray was awarded the Commendation Medal from the Air Force. Ray was a mechanic for the C-124 Globemaster, which was the main transport vehicle aircraft for the U.S. Air Force at the time. There you see him pictured in his barracks at Vung Tau Airfield in Vietnam. As I was talking to Ray about these pictures, he was describing to me the Pratt & Whitney engine that you see 4 of them on the Globemaster. It was his duty to repair each one of them and maintain them. As we talked, it was like he was remembering every wire, every bolt, every nut in that engine. I asked him, I said, Ray, do you think you could go back there and work on them again? He said, I'd love to. His last tour of duty after leaving Vietnam was at Tinker Air Force Base. Ray was assigned to the prestigious Honor Guard there, where he served out his last few days, last time in the Air Force. Our next veteran is Ira Spence, pictured here with his wife Marie. Ira left the military as a staff sergeant, serving with the Air Force as an administration specialist. You need to come down one rank. Not every person in the military during this time served in Vietnam. Many served in other important areas, and Ira served in a very important phase of the Air Force. Ira was part of the Defense Language Institute operations. You see it here pictured at Lackland Air Force Base and at Webb Air Force, Big Springs, Texas. This was kind of an unusual assignment that he had. As you can see in the bottom right, soldiers from all over the world at the time, our allies, were brought here as part of their military training. Our government wanted to teach them how our military works so that they could take those skills back to their country. But before they could go to our schools to learn how we work, they had to learn how to speak English. And this is the place where Ira worked, processing the paperwork, getting people in and out, making sure that they were there at the right time, at the right place. A very important key position in the operation of the Defense Language Institute. Ira said, when I spoke to him about this, he said, I want to say something to the church. And so I put this on the screen. Being in the Air Force was a rewarding experience for my life. I love my country and was glad I had the opportunity for service. I think every veteran I spoke to had the same feelings. Our next veteran that we're featuring is Rich Mongold, pictured here with his wife, Kay. Rich served in Vietnam with the U.S. Air Force. Leaving as a rank of sergeant, he was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal upon his departure. Rich was initially assigned to Ogden Hill Air Force Base in Utah, material area where they were basically fabricating the metals and working with the metals used to support the Air Force. You see him here as inviting his wife on his airplane before they were shipping out for Vietnam. Kay got to see the C-130 that he was working on. He was also awarded the Air Force Commendation Medal, as you see there in the bottom left. Our next veteran is Scott Pryor, pictured here with his wife, Juanita. Scott is a Vietnam veteran serving with the U.S. Army. The branch that he served in was the Military Police Corps. While in Vietnam, Scott was there probably during some of the most intense fighting during the Tet Offensive in 1968. You see him pictured here in one of his Jeeps, but also pulling guard duty on the Saigon River there in Vietnam. Our next veteran, Aaron Martinez, pictured with his wife Carol, late wife Carol. He served in the U.S. Army in a most unusual position, much like Nelson Eddy, but he was on the other side of the world. He served in the Army Security Agency. He was assigned to Cagnew Station in Africa. He described it as like being in Hawaii. It was a beautiful place. It was a very top secret location with top secret business. Again, like Nelson Eddy, they were intercepting Morse code communications. Doing this by hand. As they were listening to it, they were writing down what the words were. This was before the digital era, when now machines translate the Morse code digitally. Aaron said he got up to about 25 words a minute. Our next veteran that we're featuring here is Bob Summers, pictured here with his wife, Anita. Bob served in the U.S. Air Force as a weapons specialist. He served during the Vietnam time, but he wasn't assigned to Vietnam, and I'll explain in a moment. You see his assignments there. One of his primary assignments was in Japan. Here you see the picture at the left with his late wife, Susan. In December of 67, while they were engaged, when he was assigned to Bunker Hill Air Force Base. He served as a weapons specialist loading bombs on the F-4 aircraft. I think I got this right. Misawa Air Force Base, is that right, Bob? Okay. Our next veteran is Billy Higginbotham, pictured here with his wife Brenda. Billy is a Vietnam veteran, served in the U.S. Army with the Artillery Division. Billy changed a little bit. He didn't have a beard in the Army. See him, picture where he and Brenda were married in 1967, before he went to Vietnam. Pictures that Billy supplied. He was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division. He's artillery. There you see him in one of the bunkers. Billy had something he wanted to say to the church as well, a quote that he wanted to relate to you, and I'll show you what that was. He said, if you meet a fellow soldier today who served in Vietnam, you only say 3 words to each other. Welcome home, brother. And that's because nobody welcomed home the veterans from Vietnam. Our next veteran who entered in 1968, Terry Barnett, pictured with his wife Joyce. Served in the U.S. Army as a 1st lieutenant in the Military Intelligence Branch. Terry was awarded the Combat Air Medal. Terry was assigned to the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, which was shorthand noticed as MACV. There you see him in his dress blues at the top left. In the middle there, looking over a weapons cache. Part of his job was to find out where these weapons were, where they were being held as an intelligence officer. You see down here on the right with an interpreter dressed in a little different clothes. There Terry is at his award ceremony in 1969. Our next veteran is Don Beard. Don had 2 periods of service in the military, first with the Air Force and later with the Public Health Service Command. The Public Health Service is commanded by the U.S. Surgeon General. It's a non-combatant branch of the military. Don retired as a commander, was awarded the Commendation Medal from the Air Force. Over on the far right, you see him when he was in the Air Force, 1969. Pictured here with Don and his late wife Ann when they were married in 1969. He was assigned to Langley Air Force Base. And finally, over on the far left, here he is in his Navy whites when he was with the Public Service Command, which is part of the U.S. Navy. Don wanted to share this picture with you. He said at our last duty station in Newport News, Church of Christ, it was a wonderful experience with the people there, making lifelong friends. the Christians there at that church. He and his wife, late wife Ann, were very active there. Our next veteran featured is Bruce Beck, pictured here with his wife Nettie. Bruce is a veteran of Vietnam, serving with the U.S. Army. His duties were a driver and a guard for a lieutenant colonel. Don was assigned to Da Nang Army base in Vietnam. You see him showing off some of his muscles there, I guess. Don was, as you see on the far right, the newspaper announcement of his deployment to Vietnam or entry on military service. It showed that he's received his Bachelor of Science degree and then later entered service in the military. Don had it, one of the things that he gave to me was this paycheck. I wanted you to notice that. He had a paycheck for 10 cents while in Vietnam, which probably means he was sending all his money back home to his wife. This was a period of time of a lot of turbulence and unrest here in the United States during the 60s. Even at one point in time, there were attempts by demonstrators against the war to storm the Pentagon and destroy it. You see there on the bottom left that Richard Nixon, a portion of him is pictured where it was finally an accord, a peace agreement was reached where POWs were to be freed. It was a very turbulent time, and the country was strongly divided. Strongly divided. A lot of hate toward the government and a lot of hate toward those who wore the uniform to represent the government. I saw this online and I thought it expressed what Billy Higginbotham was trying to say better than anything. We expect nothing in Vietnam, and when we got home, nothing's what we got. All we have is each other. And I think if you ask any of the Vietnam veterans or those who served during the 60s, they would agree. I'm glad our elders have decided to recognize them this time. I'd like to ask all the veterans that have been featured here today to please rise. And if you're a veteran, if you've ever served in the military, in the National Guard, the Army Reserves, or on active duty, please stand now. If you're sitting here in the audience, please stand now. Thank you. It's time to applaud. Let's all stand and we'll sing a closing song. Andrew? All right, we got Andrew on the stage here. He's going to lead us in a closing song.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
You're excused. Just